You cannot arrest your way out of the problem. When I came home in 2003 as a detective sergeant, I said that. I'm saying it today. You cannot arrest your way out of the problem. But in those 2.5 years, I was part of a team identifying and dismantling drug organizations in the fight against heroin. We seized over 80,000 grams of heroin. To put that in perspective, a neighboring state police agency in the same time frame seized less than 8,000 grams. We seized over 18,000 OxyContin hydrocodone pills and made over 4,000 drug arrests. Then you have awareness. Awareness is the key. If you double down on awareness, prevention will go down and enforcement will go down. Not long before my retirement, I was asked to speak at a press conference at the Annapolis Police Department. The Governor O'Malley, was seated to my right. For those of you that watched the Democratic presidential debates, Hillary Clinton is in the center. To our right is the governor, to her left. And he had not announced yet that he was going to run, but I'm thinking, I got to speak after a potential presidential candidate. He was traveling to the United States in his quest again for a presidential run. I was traveling to the state of Maryland in my quest to battle the heroin addiction and the issues we're facing. So I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, okay, I'm seated next to a presidential candidate. Let's get it together. The governor got up, he didn't do so well. He's either behind or ahead of his slides, and he sat down. As I was getting up, he whispers in my ear, and he says, "That was dry, wasn't it?" I was this close to saying, "Mr. Governor, I think I can pick you up." But it took me way too long to get those insignias that identified me as the rank of major. So I delivered an address, and I got done, and members of the media said, "You're receiving some incredible tweets. Would you like the hashtag?" I said, "Thank you, but I don't tweet." I said, "May I ask, how about the governor?" They said, "In concert, not so good." I hope today I can deliver that same message to you today. Drug awareness. With awareness, there's hope. Individuals in your communities are dying because of lack of knowledge. Heroin is the #1 threat to the state of West Virginia. Heroin is the #1 threat to the state of Maryland. Per capita, more people in the United States are dying of heroin and opioid overdoses in the state of West Virginia than any state in the United States. When you look at 2014, there was 1,041 total drug overdose deaths. Of those 1,041 in Maryland in 2014, 578 were heroin. To put that in perspective, more people are dying of heroin than getting killed on your streets. Over 360 people killed by homicide. Over 450 people killed by automobile accidents. And to dwell down into Allegheny County, this month alone, you had 22. This month alone, you had 22 non-fatal heroin overdoses. You had 3 fatal overdoses of heroin this month in Allegheny County. To put that in perspective, for all of 2015, the Maryland State Police handled 4 fatal motor vehicle accidents. So heroin is the #1 threat to Maryland. Heroin is the #1 threat to West Virginia. It doesn't matter what county, what community I was in Maryland, as I traveled the state speaking to thousands. The message was the same. Every county, every community, they talked about heroin. On February 24th of this year, I stood on the second floor of the State House with the governor, lieutenant governor, and many others. And he rolled out a plan, and the plan was, I'm going to create a council, I'm going to create an emergency task force, and we're going to come out with a finding. Now keep in mind, when the governor rolled this out, he was only in office for 4 weeks. But the governor said, you know, when we were on the campaign trail, we would ask community leaders, what's your problem? Expecting to hear budgets, potholes. Every county, every community, it was heroin. I listened to the governor talk about from 2010 to 2013, a 95% increase in heroin overdose deaths. When you look at the stats that are in already for this year, the stats are limited, January to June, we're 71 fatal overdoses over last year. We're 47 over for heroin addiction. When I talk about someone dope sick, I'm not talking about a bad person. Dope sick is how they talk about each other in the heroin community. If you have a client come in and you start talking to that client and the client says, I'm dope sick, or my friend's dope sick. Dope is heroin, dope sick is how they talk about each other. You're not talking about a bad person. I've traveled this state speaking to hundreds of people that are addicted to heroin. Not one of them said, hey Jimmy, second time, first time, third time. It was the first time. I was at a high school in this county, and I was presenting, and the auditorium was full. And I made eye contact with a little girl to my left. And it was my belief that she's using heroin, but she's not addicted because she was getting unnerved. When I got done, she comes up, "Mr. Pyles, can I talk to you?" "Sure, sweetie." She said, "I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart, telling me that someone addicted to heroin is not a bad person." I asked why. "Do you know so-and-so?" "I do. She passed of a heroin overdose on Christmas Eve." She started crying very hard and said, "That person was my mom's best friend. I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart, telling me that someone addicted to heroin is not a bad person." In Allegheny County, your C3I narcotic investigators identified what we call a DTO, a drug trafficking operation, responsible for about 70% of the heroin coming into your county. So we knew when we locked these individuals up on a Wednesday, there's going to be a community that's going to be dope sick because they cannot get their heroin locally because we're going to shut it down for a short period of time. We launched the initiative on a Wednesday and we're locking them up. "Luke, how long before you get sick?" "I got about 20 minutes. "Sarah, how long before you get sick?" "I got about 40 minutes. When I say that, when you talk to someone sick with heroin, they're going to tell you when they're to start withdrawing. Take the worst case of flu you ever had, you times it times 100, and that's what they go through withdrawing from heroin. So we launched the initiative on a Wednesday. On a Friday, 2 success stories. A mother called in on Friday to our secretary and said, "I want to thank you from the bottom of our heart, you saved my daughter's life." "What do you mean?" "You locked up her supplier, she admitted herself to treatment." That same day, a little girl, 19 years of age, from Barton, Maryland, gets in her car to drive from Barton to Baltimore City to buy her heroin. She cannot get it locally. She pulls over in Flintstone and she dials 911. I know that every single person in this room is familiar with that animal called HIPAA, but I received a phone call. I walked in the emergency room. Here lays a little girl with the deepest, darkest brown of eyes I've ever seen. Her hands are clenched so tight to the sheet they're shaking. Her little socks are sticking out the end of the bed, and they're brown as brown could be. We're at your addiction. I'm using about 10 to 12 caps of heroin a day. That means she's ejecting 10 to 12 times a day, 19 years of age, from Barton, Maryland. How are you getting your money? I have 80 to 90 bad checks out there. Sharing needles, just with my boyfriend. The mother walks in. They spent some time together. I asked the mother, I said, "May I speak to you, please?" We stepped out in the hallway, and I explained to her heroin addiction is a chronic disease. It's a lifelong disease. And I gave her a number of options. And you know, ladies and gentlemen, several things come into play that day. You had a victim that needed help. You had the Western Maryland Health System. You had the Department of Health and Mental Hygiene, and you had law enforcement to make a difference in that little girl's life every day. Because every single day, that little 9-year-old girl is making a difference in people's lives every day. When I lived out or worked in Baltimore City, I lived out near Rocky Gap. I had to be in Baltimore City in our fugitive task force at 5 o'clock in the morning. I refused to move to Baltimore City. So I commuted every single day from Rocky Gap to Baltimore City, leaving my house about 2:30, 2:45 in the morning. I would log, driving it 5 days a week, about 5,000 miles a month, driving it 5 days a week, down and back. I came back home, detective sergeant in Allegheny County. We identified a female cheerleader at a local high school that if I could show her picture now and then I could move on to crystal meth, I'd never have to say another word about heroin. But she would get up, she graduated from high school, had a child, child's on the school bus, Baltimore City. Child's off the school bus, Baltimore City. We learned in 1 month, she put 10,000 miles on her car in 1 month. She had been arrested, home detention, and I received a phone call from the West Virginia State Police, and they said, "We have a 22-year-old male lying dead on Route 28 in Wally Ford. We need your assistance. It's going to be a while before the crime lab arrives." We roll up, there lays a 22-year-old male, handgun next to his head, lying in his own pool of blood, where he inadvertently shot himself in the head. He had robbed a news convenience store. He had $400 in his pocket. In the heat of passion, he runs by his getaway car, shoots himself in the head. That getaway car was the little girl that put 10,000 miles in 1 month on her car through our investigation. That was her boyfriend, robbed the store to feed her addiction. So again, when I talk about someone addicted to heroin, you're not talking about a bad person. You're talking about someone that has made a bad choice. Let's talk about what it's like to be dope sick. Every day, I'm going to wake up and my sole thought process is every single day I want to use heroin. I have to find heroin. Not long ago, I was in Queen Anne's County. On your journey to Ocean City, as soon as you cross the Bay Bridge, that is Queen Anne's County. The Chamber of Commerce asked me to spend some time that I'm doing with you, their morning breakfast. I got done speaking, and a mother comes up to me, and we know how hard life is. And a mother comes up, and she says, I want to thank you for talking about a heroin addiction. She said, my daughter is addicted to heroin. She was clean. She's relapsed. I said, part of recovery is relapsing. She said, I walk in every day, and I wake my daughter up. I shake her, not to know if she's going to be dead or alive of a heroin overdose. That same day, that same meeting, the Chamber of Commerce, the barrack commander of that area said, hey, could you come back? I would like you to talk to this blonde, young blonde lady. Lady was probably in her late 30s. She needs to tell you a story. I said, sure. She said, we went back to the barracks. She said, I want to thank you for talking about being dope sick. You talked about snorting for about 2 weeks. She said, actually, I snorted heroin for 4 years. She lived in Cecil County. When you look at Maryland as far as you can go, next to Delaware. She described her journey every single day, waking up, driving from Cecil County. Her theft scheme, when she'd get to Baltimore City, she would have about $150 a day to buy her heroin. Her theft scheme, stopping at Walmarts, wherever she could, she would steal. She said, I never got arrested. One time I went in Walmart, I scored heavy. Here's a beautiful blonde-haired girl telling me this, lives on the water, married, and has a child. And she said, I scored heavy. I went out and I injected. She said, I was nodding. I got careless. I went back in. I stole it again, but I got caught. They did not call the authorities. She said, my condition worsened, my addiction worsened, and I started injecting. I started running with 2 very violent brothers. It was a Friday, 5 o'clock in the evening, and we had a large quantity of heroin that was ordered up to a motel. I was the driver. She said she pulled up, knocked on the door of the 2 brothers. Unbeknownst to her, it was the state police. They yanked the 2 brothers in. They pull them in. She's looking. She starts to pull out. She said, I see this trooper in front of my car telling me to stop. I gun it. The trooper discharges his firearm. The round goes in and lodges in my ear. She said, I did not know what to do. I drove around. She said, I'm going to do this because I've always done it. She said, I pulled to a 7-Eleven and I'm bleeding. And I thought, what do I do? She said, I walked into 7-Eleven and I screamed, I've been robbed, I've been robbed. She said, they immediately closed the doors. She said, there was a nurse in the room in the 7-Eleven. She said, I would not even have touched myself with the abscesses on my body. She said, this nurse stopped everything, stopped my bleeding. I was sent to jail. I woke up. Where's my mom? Where's my dad? I called my mom. Mother said, hey, the ball's been in your court. The ball is in my court. She spent her time in jail. She's out. She talks about heroin all the time. Lives on the water, child, married, and does well. She tells me all of this, and she gets done, and she goes like this. I said, what are you doing? She said, I'm an arm's length away. I could use right now. I could use tomorrow. With any opioid, heroin addiction, it's changing the brain. It's changing the way they think. How does a heroin addiction start? I'll start by this. If you have a family, you have a loved one, and you think for a second that they're living in your household and they're addicted to heroin, if you're going through spoons and you're going through lighters, you start asking questions. I was in Kaiser, West Virginia, and I gave that very comment, or made that very comment. The next day I received an email from a father that was titled, My Son, the Heroin Addict. Had excessive spoons, excessive lighters, because every single day they're going to wake up, they're going to get their spoon out, their hit kit, their fix kit. They're going to get their needle out. They're going to heat it. They're going to liquefy it. If you, 2 things will trigger a heroin addiction faster than anything. Talk to someone that's addicted to heroin or let them smell a lighter. Because every day, multiple times a day, they're lighting that and they're liquefying that. Then they're inserting their needle down into the spoon. Then they will inject. If you talk to a patient comes in and says, I just hit the pits. Start looking here. That's generally what they talk about. They talk about the pits. They're hitting the pits. They will tie off. They will inject. and they release and they're high. If your patient says, I skin pop heroin, start looking at their arms for extreme tattooing, because they will tattoo up to cover up the injection sites, and they refer to this as in skin popping heroin. Sometimes to the neck, injecting heroin. They will go below the waistline. They do not have to tie off, injecting heroin, just whatever the site, the comfort, whatever is best for them, between the toes, the legs. The hands is the last place they will go to injecting heroin, generally. Why? It is so painful, it's so visible. If you have anybody come in and you see injection sites to the hands, start asking questions because they've hit rock bottom. We had a 22-year-old male pass on Maryland Avenue that we had dealt with a lot. I responded to the overdose and I saw injection sites to the hands. I start talking to his girlfriend. Jimmy, I'm telling you, he wasn't using. When it come back, he died of medical complications, and it was not from a complication from an overdose. Let's talk about your treatment modalities for a heroin addiction, a chronic disease. It's a lifelong disease. It's not something you're going to battle today, tomorrow. It's something you're going to battle the rest of your life. You have methadone, buprenorphine, Vivitrol. Methadone is the most studied drug out there for any heroin or opioid addiction, clinically based. I'm addicted to heroin. Referral, I show up at a clinic and I pay approximately $11 a day. $322 a month for a sense of normalcy to not get sick. When you break it down, the average habit is $100 a day. Let's briefly talk about that. As I traveled the state, I would often hear people say, but Jimmy, Allegheny County is the poorest county in the state of Maryland. My comeback was, we might be the poorest county in the state of Maryland, but it's the richest state in the United States, so for medium household income, so I'll concede that we're the poorest county in the state of Maryland. June 16th, there was an article in the Times News from 24/7 Wall Street that said Cumberland City is the poorest city in the state of Maryland. When you look at the economics for just heroin for Allegheny County, assume we have 200 people that's dope sick in Allegheny County. $100 a day, average habit. It's $20,000 a day. Poorest county, poorest city, state of Maryland. That's $600,000 a month, poorest county, poorest city, state of Maryland. That's $7.2 million a year, poorest county, poorest city, the state of Maryland. But you break it down for treatment modalities. Methadone, $11 a day. Sense of normalcy. I crossed paths with a 22-year-old male that was at a self-admitted, 22 years of age, $200 a day habit. As I stand here today, his mother and father have no idea he was ever addicted to heroin. None. He has a pre-existing medical condition, and he would cover up his medical condition when he was withdrawing, saying, Mom and Dad, I have this. Yep, I got it. He's currently in a methadone clinic. He's got married, child, and he's doing very well. If I have anybody come to me and say, Jimmy, my loved one, my son, my daughter is addicted to an opioid or heroin, buprenorphine, or Suboxone is where I introduce them. Introduced by the FDA in 2001, when it was introduced, one physician, 30 patients. That has since lifted. The jury's still out because it's so new. My wife owns a small business here in Allegheny County. One of her clients, her son, we arrested her son. For a period of time, my wife never talked about her client. My wife never talked about her client's son. And he got out of jail, and we got him on an intensive buprenorphine program. Being on the program for about 6 months, Sunday morning, I run into my client's, the mother, the son we locked up, my wife's client. And I said, may I ask, how's your son doing? She said, Jimmy Pyles, when he was born, celebrate every pound he gained. He's gained 30 pounds on buprenorphine. I celebrate every pound of those 30 pounds. Vivitrol. About 2 years ago, year and a half ago, I was asked to speak to senators and delegates from Maryland, West Virginia, Virginia, and Pennsylvania. And I was up front, and it was a horseshoe table, and they were asking me questions one by one. We get to the last senator to my left, and he says, hey, Major, tell me what you know about Vivitrol. I said, I absolutely know nothing. I'm going to have to get back to you. That senator that asked me that question is now the director of the governor's office of crime control and prevention. This is one of his initiatives, is Vivitrol. Vivitrol is an injection that you have to be clean before you inject, and he's identifying people at high risk. He has offered up and provided $500,000 for the administration of Vivitrol for those who are at risk in your institutions, getting ready to be released and are high risk as far as going back to a heroin addiction. What does heroin look like? A cap of heroin. Baltimore City is your last major metropolitan area to sell it in a cap. For Baltimore City, a cap of heroin, $4, $6, $8. 30 milligrams of Oxycontin on the street is $30. So it's very easy for them, when they get addicted to any opioid medication, to go to heroin. It's more pure and it's cheaper. Your Mexican cartels are changing gears. With the legalization of marijuana, they're not making money. So the same means that they've got marijuana in for years in the United States, they're doing the exact same thing with heroin. It is cheaper and it is more potent. That is a fix kit, that's a hit kit. If you see a loved one, your child, your grandson, your granddaughter, carrying a Crown Rule bag, anything that he or she should not have with them, tough love. Start looking through it. As you will see, it's a spoon, something to tie off with. I was in South End in Cumberland City, and a call came out for an unresponsive 24-year-old male. And the story is this. The mother went in and said, hey, come out here and grab a bite to eat. The son said, give me 20 minutes, I'll be out. The call comes out from Fire and Rescue for unresponsive. I was in the area. The bedroom was very small. Fire and Rescue beat me there. The mother is knelt down on her knees. She's praying to God. You can clearly see their young son got up, has surrounded by his hit kit, injected 2 caps of heroin, never to wake again. So I don't know how many times I can say it. We talk about someone addicted. I don't care if it's heroin, if it's crack. We're about to talk to meth. You're not talking about a bad person.